Have you ever sat in a coffee shop watching an older couple laugh together and wondered, how do they stay so connected while others grow so alone? It's not about good genes or luck. Most of the time it comes down to habits. Little things like the way we speak, the way we show up, or how we respond when life doesn't go our way. Some of these habits help us stay close. Others push people away without us even knowing. The truth is, we don't just age. We either age with connection or without it. And the difference? It's in the small things. This video is going to walk you through those things, because once you see them, you can change them. And when you do, life gets a little lighter, a little warmer, and a lot more full of love. Let me tell you something right up front. Aging is not the problem. It isn't. The real issue, more often than not, is disconnection. Little things we don't even notice start to build up. You stop calling as much. You stop dressing up for lunch. You tell yourself it doesn't matter, but it does. Over time, those choices become habits, and those habits, they can quietly build walls around us. Take Susan, for example. She's a retired librarian, smart, independent, kind, but somehow she found herself feeling invisible. No one was calling, no one was dropping by, and she couldn't figure out why. What she didn't realize was that she had slowly pulled away first. That's what we're talking about today. This video is not about pointing fingers or feeling bad. It's about shining a light. Because once you see these patterns, you can start choosing differently. You can start reconnecting, and that changes everything. Let's be honest. We all fall into patterns without realizing it. You start doing something a certain way, and before you know it, it becomes part of your daily life. But what if those habits, the ones that feel comfortable, are pushing people away? That's what happened to Susan. She didn't mean to grow distant. It just happened. A little silence here, a bit of resistance there, and then one day, the house felt too quiet. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. The good news? Habits can be changed. The first, negativity. Let's talk about something that creeps in slowly, negativity. It doesn't show up overnight. For Susan, it started with little things. She would wake up and groan about her back. Then the news would come on and she'd sigh heavily and mumble about how the world was falling apart. When her grandkids came to visit, she didn't mean to sound critical, but phrases like, "back in my day," and "kids these days don't understand anything," slipped out more often than... At first, she thought she was just being honest. After all, she had lived a lot of life. But soon, she noticed something. The phone calls became less frequent. The visits are shorter. Conversations stayed surface level, never too deep. People around her started to pull away, and Sarah began to feel it, not just in her bones, but in her heart. Negativity has a way of isolating us, even if it feels justified. Even if we are hurting, scared, or frustrated, it rarely invites connection. No one wants to leave a conversation feeling worse than when they walked in. And over time, constant criticism or complaining can drain a room, no matter how valid the feelings behind it are. There's also something else at play here: energy. The energy you bring into a space affects everyone in it. Think about someone in your life who makes you feel lighter just by being around them. Odds are they aren't constantly complaining. They're probably noticing the good, even in small things. What changed for Susan? She had one honest moment with her daughter, who gently said, "Mom, I miss the way we used to laugh." That stopped her in her tracks. It made her realize she had the power to shift the energy she was bringing into the room. Now, does this mean ignoring the tough stuff? Not. But it means making space for gratitude, for curiosity, for joy. Start a conversation with something kind, something light. Notice the sunset. Compliment someone's effort. Ask a question you don't already know the answer to. Negativity pulls us into the past, but presence and positivity, they invite others to be with us here and now. So if you find yourself slipping into that critical voice, pause. Try saying just one positive thing first. It might surprise you how different the conversation feels. You are still someone people want to connect with. Lead with warmth. The rest will follow. You don't have to become someone else, just lean into the part of you that remembers how to love out loud. The second, hygiene appearance. There was a time when Susan never left the house without putting on her favorite perfume. She had this bright red lipstick that made her feel alive and scarves in colors that lit up a room. She didn't dress for anyone else. She dressed for herself because it made her feel like the woman she knew she was. But slowly that started to fade. Maybe it was because there weren't many outings anymore. Maybe it was because comfort became easier than effort. Either way, the lipstick stayed in the drawer, the scarves collected dust. She told herself, what's the point? I'm not trying to impress anyone. And then came the habit of staying in house clothes all day, the soft but shapeless shirts, the slippers instead of shoes, hair unbrushed, earrings forgotten. Susan stopped looking in the mirror altogether. She didn't feel like herself, but she also didn't feel worth the effort anymore. It wasn't depression, it was something subtler. A slow fading of self, a quiet letting go of the rituals that once made her feel proud. Then one day she found an old photo of herself. She was laughing, dressed in a teal blouse with her hair freshly styled. There was a sparkle in her eyes. She stared at that photo for a long time, and something stirred inside her. Not regret, but longing. A longing to feel like that again. So she started small. Brushing her hair, wearing jeans instead of pajamas, adding just a touch of perfume. It felt strange at first, almost silly, but something shifted. Her neighbors complimented her, her friends noticed the change in her voice. She began to carry herself differently, more confidently, more openly. Because the truth is, how we take care of ourselves on the outside affects how we feel on the inside. It is not about beauty, it is about presence. About saying, I am still someone worth showing up for. Even science backs this up. Studies show that personal grooming is tied to mood, confidence, and even memory. When we stop tending to ourselves, we often start fading socially and emotionally too. So tomorrow, try it. Wear that piece of clothing you love, style your hair, look yourself in the mirror and say, I still matter, because you do, more than you know. And the world needs the version of you that feels fully alive. The third, stubbornness. Susan was proud of her routines. She liked things a certain way and had followed the same habits for years. Her morning coffee had to be in the same mug. She watched the same news channel at the same time. She called her children on Sundays, and that was how it had always been. So when her family started texting instead of calling, she brushed it off. If they want to talk to me, they can pick up the phone, she said. She refused to learn how to text. At first it didn't seem like a big deal, but slowly she started missing things. Pictures of her grandkids, updates about family get-togethers, funny videos, group chats, and even simple reminders. All of it passed her by. She didn't realize the world wasn't trying to leave her out. She was the one pulling away. And it was more than just texting. Susan didn't want to try new food, watch new shows, or even listen to different music. Everything new felt uncomfortable, strange. But all that resistance was doing one thing, making her world smaller. One afternoon, her granddaughter sat beside her and said, "Grandma, do you want to see the video I made for school?" Susan hesitated but said yes. That small yes opened a door. She laughed. She asked questions. And suddenly, she felt connected in a way she hadn't in a long time. Change is not easy, but being stubborn for the sake of comfort can cost us connection. Being open to something new doesn't mean giving up who you are, it means expanding who you are. Susan eventually asked her granddaughter to teach her how to send a text, then how to send a picture, then how to use emojis. And every lesson was not just about technology, it was about closeness. It was about love. So if you catch yourself saying, "I don't need that," pause and ask, "But what might I gain if I try?" Learning something new, no matter how small, is not a weakness. It is a strength, a bridge, a way forward. Try one new thing this week. Let it be weird, let it be awkward, and let it bring you closer to someone you love. The fourth, hoarding. Susan's home was full of memories. Every shelf, drawer, and corner held a story. Old birthday cards, stacks of newspapers, shoes from years ago are still in their boxes. She told herself they all meant something, that one day she might need them. But the truth was, most of it hadn't been touched in years. Her home, once cozy and bright, began to feel crowded, and not just with stuff, with weight, with history, with a sense that the past was louder than the present. When friends came over, Susan would apologize for the mess. She meant well, but she rarely let them pass the front door. Hosting became uncomfortable, embarrassing. At first she thought she was preserving her memories, but slowly she realized she was hiding behind them. The clutter wasn't just in her house, it was in her mind, her heart, and her routines. It kept her stuck, unable to breathe, afraid to let go. One day her daughter gently asked, "Mom, do you need all of this?" Susan bristled at first, then, standing in the hallway surrounded by unopened boxes and yellowed papers, she sighed. Letting go isn't easy, especially when each object feels like a piece of a life well lived. But Susan realized that the life she had lived didn't disappear when she gave something away. The memories didn't vanish with the donation bag. She started small, one box, one drawer, one memory at a time. She kept the letters that made her smile. She let go of the ones that brought her pain. Slowly, her home began to breathe again, and so did she. She also began to notice something else. The more she cleared, the lighter she felt. She had space to stretch, to move, to live. She could finally invite people over without hesitation. Her home felt like home again, not a storage unit for her past. Clutter can feel safe, but it can also trap us. Releasing it isn't about erasing the past, it's about making space for today, for new connections, new joy, and new stories yet to come. Pick one thing today, just one. Hold it, remember it, and if it no longer serves you, release it. Let the light back in, because the past may shape you, but it should never bury you. You deserve to live fully right now. The fifth, patience. Susan used to think of herself as a patient person. She raised kids, worked with all kinds of people, and knew how to hold her tongue. But lately things have changed. Lines felt longer, people seemed slower, and every small inconvenience began to feel personal. At the grocery store one day, the young cashier was fumbling with the scanner. Susan, already tired from standing in line, snapped, "Can you please move a little faster?" she said, a little too loudly. The boy looked up, startled. He didn't say anything, just kept scanning with shaky hands. When Susan got to her car, she sat there for a moment. Her groceries were in the back seat, her heart heavier than it should have been. That boy was probably just nervous. Maybe it was his first week, maybe he had a rough morning. Either way, he didn't deserve that. That's when it hit her. She wasn't just losing patience with the world, she was losing patience with herself. And it was costing her peace. Patience is more than waiting quietly. It is choosing not to make a hard moment harder. It is recognizing that the world won't always move at our pace, and that's okay. When we rush to frustration, we close the door on kindness, and not just toward others, toward ourselves too. Susan started thinking back on other moments, times she rolled her eyes at her neighbor who moved slowly down the steps. Times she interrupted a friend mid-story because they were taking too long to get to the point. Each time she missed an opportunity to connect. So she tried something new. The next time she felt irritation bubbling up, she paused, took a breath, counted to 5, asked herself, "Is this really worth my peace?" Sometimes the answer was yes, but most of the time it wasn't. And slowly, the pauses became longer. The reactions are softer. She smiled more. And in return, people smiled back. Losing your patience doesn't make you a bad person, it makes you human. But learning to hold on to it, even just a little longer, can turn a tense moment into a chance for grace. So, next time someone is taking too long, try offering a smile instead of a sigh. You never know what they're going through, and you never know how your patience might change their day and yours. It is not about perfection. It is about presence, staying present enough to choose kindness over irritation. You may be surprised how much calmer life feels when you stop rushing through it. The sixth, listening. Susan loved to talk. She had lived a full life, filled with stories, lessons, and advice, and she believed sharing them was her way of passing on wisdom. But somewhere along the way she forgot something important. Listening matters just as much, sometimes even more. Conversations with her daughter started to feel one-sided. Susan would launch into memory or give her opinion before her daughter could finish a sentence. One day her daughter said with a tired smile, "Mom, I love hearing your stories, but sometimes I just need you to hear me." That moment stuck with Susan. She started to notice how often she jumped in. How many times does she give advice that wasn't asked for? How her grandkids would trail off mid-sentence, realizing she wasn't truly listening. It wasn't mean-spirited, it wasn't on purpose, but the result was still the same. People felt unheard. Listening is more than silence, it is presence. It is putting your thoughts on pause and tuning into someone else's experience. It is not just hearing the words, but caring enough to reflect them. Susan began asking more questions. She said things like, "Tell me more," or "What was that like for you?" She let her family finish their thoughts. And when she did respond, it was gentle and brief, often just enough to keep the conversation going, not to take it over. To her surprise, people leaned in more. Her daughter opened up about work stress. Her grandson shared how nervous he was about a school play. Susan realized she didn't have to fix anything. She just had to be there. We all want to feel seen. And sometimes the most powerful way to make someone feel seen is to simply stay quiet and let them speak. Try this. In your next conversation, count to 3 before responding. Ask a follow-up question. Make eye contact. Let the silence breathe between you. You don't have to fill every gap with a story. Sometimes the space is where the trust grows. Talking is how we share who we are, but listening? That's how we make someone feel like they matter. And in a world full of noise, your quiet attention might be the most loving gift you can give. The 7th. Help. Susan had always been proud of her independence. She raised 3 children, managed a household on her own, and rarely asked for anything. For years, being self-sufficient was a badge of honor. If something needed to be done, she figured it out herself. But one afternoon, after grocery shopping, she struggled to lift a heavy bag into the trunk of her car. A young man nearby saw her straining and offered help. Susan smiled politely and said, "No, thank you, I've got it." She didn't. Her back ached for days afterward, but what hurt even more was the realization that she had said no, not out of strength, but out of pride. Later that evening, as she nursed a sore shoulder, it hit her. All these moments she had turned down help were missed chances. Missed chances for connection, kindness, even friendship. Asking for help isn't a weakness, it is human. It says, "I trust you, I value what you can offer." And accepting help, that opens doors to shared moments, unexpected laughter, and mutual respect. Susan remembered times when she helped others, neighbors, friends, even strangers. It made her feel useful and needed. Why would she deny someone else the same opportunity? So she made a quiet promise to herself. Next time someone offered, she would say yes. And she would also learn to ask. Not only when lifting heavy things, but when she needed company, advice, or a moment of support. The next week, her granddaughter asked if she could stop by and help Susan organize her photos. Normally, Susan would have said, "I can handle it." But this time, she smiled and said, "I'd love that." They laughed and shared stories, and by the end of the afternoon, both felt more connected than they had in a long time. That simple yes opened up something deeper. Trust, warmth, letting someone help you build bridges. It invites warmth and reminds you that you are not alone. If you have spent your whole life being the one who gives, it might feel strange to receive. But giving and receiving are 2 sides of the same love. Try it. Let someone carry a bag. Let them walk you to the door. Let them listen. You're not burdening them, you're blessing them with a chance to show up. And sometimes, that's exactly what both of you need. The 8th. Frugal. Susan was always careful with money. She knew how to stretch a dollar, clip a coupon, and resist unnecessary spending. She had spent decades saving for retirement, for rainy days, and for just-in-case moments. That discipline gave her a sense of control. But what she didn't realize was that it had also created a quiet fear. Fear of running out, fear of wasting, fear of indulging. So when her best friend Chloe invited her on a weekend trip to the countryside, Susan's first instinct was to decline. The hotel cost too much, eating out seemed excessive, and besides, what if something happened and she needed that money later? She stayed home, alone. The weekend came and went, and so did the laughter, the shared meals, the memories she could have made. All she was left with was silence, and the feeling that maybe saving everything wasn't saving anything at all. Financial responsibility is important, but joy matters too. You worked hard, sacrificed, planned, and saved. And at some point the question becomes, what are you saving for, if not to enjoy the life you built? Susan began to rethink things. She started with small steps, buying herself fresh flowers just because, taking herself out for lunch at a nice cafe, booking a massage she'd been putting off for years. Each choice was a reminder she was allowed to feel good. She was allowed to enjoy what she had. She also began to notice that these small joys lifted her mood. She had more to talk about with friends, she smiled more, she felt more like herself, not just someone surviving, but someone living. And guess what? That weekend trip she originally turned down, she said yes to the next one. And she laughed more in those 2 days than she had in months. It wasn't the spending that brought her joy, it was the living. It was the choice to say yes to herself. You do not have to go big. You do not have to be reckless, but permit yourself to spend on what lifts you. A new book, a spontaneous lunch, a hobby that makes you feel alive. You earned more than just security, you earned joy. So go ahead, use a little of what you saved to create a memory worth holding on to. You are still here, and your life is still yours to enjoy fully. 9th, generations. Susan adored her grandson Peter. She looked forward to his visits, asked about school, and loved hearing him talk about art. But lately he had become distant. He stopped showing her his drawings, and their conversations felt shorter. One day he mentioned a new app he was excited about. Susan barely looked up and said, "Back in my day, we didn't need all that technology." Peter went quiet. Then, without saying much else, he grabbed his backpack and left early. Later that evening, Susan felt the silence more than usual. She thought about how often she said things like that without meaning harm, just out of habit. But what felt like harmless commentary to her sounded like criticism to Peter. And when people, especially young ones, feel dismissed, they pull away. It is easy to compare generations, to say things were better back then, but that kind of talk builds walls. Every generation has its struggles and strengths, they just look different. And the truth is, we lose so much connection when we lead with judgment instead of curiosity. Susan decided to change her approach. The next time Peter came over, he mentioned the same app again. This time she smiled and said, "Tell me what you like about it." Peter's eyes lit up. He explained the art tools, the animations, and the creativity behind them. Susan didn't fully understand it all, but she listened. And in that moment, the distance between them started to shrink. Later, Peter even asked if she wanted to try the app. Susan laughed, but said, "Why not?" He walked her through it, and for the first time in a while they were laughing together again. That moment wasn't about technology, it was about feeling seen, heard, valued. You do not have to love everything the younger generation loves. You do not even have to understand it all. But asking questions, showing interest, and choosing to stay open, that creates space for real connection. So next time your child or grandchild talks about something new, instead of rolling your eyes or saying, "That's silly," try asking, "What do you love about that?" And mean it. Because when you meet someone where they are, you show them they matter. You tell them their world is worth exploring, and in return, they just might invite you in. 10. Grudges. Susan couldn't stop replaying the past. Old arguments, things left unsaid, people who had let her down. It was like a radio station in her mind, always playing the same painful tune, and the more she listened, the heavier she felt. She would sit by the window with her tea, not watching the birds but thinking about how someone had wronged her years ago. It started to show, in her face, in her tone, in the way she held back from people who once meant something to her. Some of those friends drifted away, not because they wanted to, but because Susan made it hard to get close. Walls built from hurt are still walls. They block out the pain, sure, but they block out love too. Forgiveness isn't about pretending it didn't happen. It's about choosing not to carry it every single day. It's about saying, "This hurt me, but I won't let it define me." And yes, it's hard, especially when the person who hurt you never said sorry. But holding on does not protect us, it just keeps us stuck. One day, Susan wrote a letter, not to send, just to get it all out. Every resentment, every regret. Then she folded it, took it outside, and lit a match. As the paper burned, so did a little bit of the weight she had carried for years. She didn't forget the pain, but she released its grip. The next week, Susan called an old friend she hadn't spoken to in years. She didn't bring up the past, she just asked how she was. To her surprise, the voice on the other end sounded happy, grateful even. That small step toward reconnection felt like a breath of fresh air. You deserve peace, not just moments of it, but a life rooted in it, and peace begins where resentment ends. Try this. Write it all down. The grudge, the guilt, the grief. Then let it go. Tear it up, burn it, or toss it into the wind. Say goodbye to what no longer serves you. You are not your mistakes. You are not the worst thing someone said to you. You are not the pain they never acknowledged. You are here, still growing, still healing, and that means it is not too late to forgive, to release, and to finally feel light again. That night at Chloe's wasn't meant to be life-changing. It was just a simple movie night, popcorn and a comedy they picked out last minute. But for Susan, saying yes to that invitation felt like opening a window after years of stale air. She almost said no. The usual excuses came up. She was tired, it was cold, and she had nothing to wear. But something nudged her. A quiet voice said, "Go," and so she did. They didn't even finish the movie. Halfway through, they were already deep into conversation, laughing over old memories, teasing each other like they were 20 again, not 70. Chloe poured tea, and Susan helped slice fruit. There was music playing softly in the background, something from their younger days, and for a moment, it felt like time folded in on itself. When Susan got home that night, she didn't feel tired. She felt alive. It wasn't about the movie. It was about what she had said yes to: friendship, vulnerability, presence. That simple yes cracked something open in her, a reminder that joy is still here, waiting. And that maybe, just maybe, it's been here all along. Let's be real. Aging can feel like a series of slow goodbyes to roles, routines, and pieces of ourselves. But it can also be a powerful hello. Hello to clarity. Hello to second chances. Hello to showing up fully, even now. Susan didn't erase her past. She didn't pretend the hard moments didn't happen. She simply chose to stop letting them steer the rest of her life, and that choice, it made all the difference. Maybe for you it's letting go of control, or resentment, or the idea that it's too late to start over. Whatever it is, trust that even the smallest shift, a kind word, a curious question, a pause before judgment, can ripple outward in big ways. Start small. Say yes to something simple, revisit an old hobby, call someone you've been meaning to, forgive yourself. These aren't grand gestures, they're gentle turns in the direction of joy. So, here's the truth. You're not too old, too stuck, or too far gone. You're breathing, you're watching this, that means there's still time. Time to change, time to reconnect, time to come home to yourself. Tell me, what part of Susan's journey stuck with you the most? Was it the laughter she almost missed, the moment she chose to listen, or the day she let someone help? Share it in the comments. Your story could be the lifeline someone else needs today. If this video sparked something in you, even a tiny shift, give it a like, pass it on, and hit subscribe. We're not just talking about aging, we're talking about living. You're not just watching, you're part of this. Let's keep rising, together.